Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Welcome to our Q1 follow-up for the BIPOC Support Foundation Book Club. We are so thankful you're here, and we're looking forward to discussing our assigned text today, which is The Hate You Give. In advance of our discussion, we'd like to invite you to join in the following reflection, which is a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is not a new practice, but it's one you may be unfamiliar with. As we begin this book club event, it's important to note that this event today, while virtual, is being hosted in a region within the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay and Luiseno people. Today, the local tribes continue to contribute to the life of our community, to celebrate their heritage, to practice their traditions, and to care for the land and waterways here in San Diego. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of displacement, genocide, and remain cognizant of the fact that we cannot separate overlapping histories of violence that settler colonialism has brought to these lands, spurred by oppression, erasure, racialized transatlantic enslavement, and forced migration. Through this land acknowledgement, we seek to pay our respects to their elders, to recommit ourselves to the important work of dismantling systems of oppression within our region, and to acknowledge the cultural legacy of the Kumeyaay and Luiseno people. We thank them for their stewardship of this region and celebrate their contributions, past, present, and future. These acknowledgements commit us to a lifetime of anti-racist work. We'd also like to start off today with some quick introductions. Dr. Dardis is the Director of Special Education in the Oceanside Unified School District, where she's working to promote inclusive educational practices and equity for students with disabilities. She started her career as a bilingual education teacher in the Tucson Unified School District. During her 20 years there, she served as a language acquisition and literacy specialist, assistant principal, and principal. Due to the passage of Prop 203, also known as English for the Children, where the bilingual education program was effectively dismantled and emerging multilinguals were segregated into 4-hour English-only blocks, she began her doctoral studies. Her dissertation focused on language orientations and leadership amidst Arizona's restrictive language policies, which detailed how language policies were restrictive towards emerging multilinguals in Arizona. She moved to Oceanside to realize her dream to be near the water. Here, she served as the site leader in the District of Assessment and Accountability in Escondido Union High School District.
And so this is where I was able to meet and work with Cassiopeia Guthrie, who is an amazing educator and a colleague and also a friend. She's a leading edge and National Geographic certified educator. Cassiopeia Guthrie is credentialed in K-12 education, very passionate, lovely woman. She has a multiple subjects, single subjects in English and social science with specializations in biliteracy and middle level education, storytelling through digital media, and blended and online instruction. She currently works as the District EdTech TOSA in Escondido Union High School District. She was also on the advisory council here at BIPOC Support Foundation. She is passionate about equity work in the educational and art spaces, and she believes that culturally and historically responsive curriculum, restorative justice, and competency and project-based learning are important tools in our educator boxes.
And Amanda Bonds is here. She's program director at Words Alive, providing leadership for a portfolio of programs targeting children, youth, and parents, including the Read Aloud program, Family Literacy program, and Teen Services programs. Amanda also manages agency evaluation efforts and represents Words Alive on multiple education-focused community partnerships across the county, such as the Diamond Education Excellent Partnership, where she currently serves on the board of directors as chair of the 0 to 5 working group. A 2014 fellow of the San Diego Leadership Alliance, Amanda earned her master's degree in literature from the University of California, San Diego, prior to joining Words Alive in 2009. Believing in the power of learning, her teaching history includes college-level writing at UCSD, elementary-age classrooms in Jamaica, and summer programs at the San Antonio Zoo. Before moving west, Amanda served as an AmeriCorps volunteer with the Keeping Austin Housed Coalition, providing advocacy and case management to homeless immigrant families in her native state of Texas. We're so thankful she's able to join us today as we work through some curriculum surrounding the hate you give. Now, we're really honored to have the opportunity today to tackle such an ambitious set of goals. They're shown here. So you have an idea what to expect. We've built out an agenda for you so you can understand how our time together will be spent. On that note, in just a moment, we'll continue by reviewing our norms and desired outcomes. We'll get some context about the book for the day, and we'll dive into some activities related to our book study. And later in the session, we'll be sharing a curriculum resource courtesy of our wonderful sponsor, Words Alive. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and reflections with our speakers, both about the curriculum and about practices within the classroom.
So we all know that educators, we are end results focused. So with that in mind, we wanted to start by articulating our outcomes. Today, our goals are to reinforce not only why equity conversations and the inclusion of diverse texts are important, but also how to facilitate these moves into the classroom. We will also model what authentic, vulnerable conversations and lessons can look like. And finally, we will share and discuss curriculum resources with our partner, Words Alive, that you can use today in your classroom. As a part of any important conversation, we wanted to acknowledge that many of us here bring our own experiences and histories with racism and oppression. While many experience validation, the material and conversations presented here may spark a sense of trauma, frustration, guilt, and uncomfortableness. And with that in mind, our team has generated this list of norms that we're planning to hold to during the presentation. They are, please listen and speak with respect. Both verbal and nonverbal language is powerful. Respect others' privacy and only tell your own story. Share the time fairly. Land the plane. Listen to understand and not to respond. Expect to be misunderstood. Practice forgiveness and lean into discomfort. By committing to these norms, we believe that our conversation here today can be both daring and also change-making. And because I also like to fly the plane, we also want to make sure that we celebrate that today is Harvey Milk Day. And so that we always look into this as not only being part of, BIPOC support, but also partnering and allies with our fellow LGBTQ community. Now you'll hear from Cassiopeia.
As we dive into the book study today, we want to connect this to our prior knowledge, our background experiences, vocabulary, and the context of our last meeting. Now, you'll recall that at our last session, we discussed our reasons for doing this work, and namely that students need to feel safe in the classroom. They need to have their experiences validated. They need to see diversity reflected in the literature, and they need to be celebrated for the genius that they already intrinsically are bringing with them to the learning environment. Before our last meeting, our attendees were asked an optional question about their personal experience with marginalization as a student. And this is one anonymous submission that we received, but let's take a moment to read it aloud. I recall a moment in grade school where a white student called me the N-word after a history lesson. He told me that Black people are only good for being slaves because they have never contributed to this country. The teacher never taught the class how wrong this thinking was. It was not until years later that I learned about the many Black scholars and inventors. And that is an authentic submission from one of our own community members here. And as we sat through our last book club session, we were able to hear a variety of other experiences that students have had of feeling marginalized in the classroom. It's really important to take a moment right now to challenge and to consider the feelings that we're having when we're reading this particular quote. Do we think, well, the student didn't know any better, or he should have known better, or why didn't the teacher say or do something, or maybe he didn't mean it? Or do we think this wouldn't happen in my classroom, or I would never allow this behavior to continue? What if you didn't see it or you didn't hear it? Does that mitigate the harm? The only way that we as teachers, as educators, can move forward is through creating a culture of learning where diversity and inclusion are integrated transparently and candidly, and frankly, celebrated. As you're probably aware, we recorded our first session. So if you need more time to sit with this, or you want to hear more stories about what our performers, our speakers, and our audience members experienced, we're going to actually drop the link in the chat to that presentation. So you'll be able to see the video embedded on that page. We've added that now. Now, rather than watching and listening to that again today, our goal is to expand on the work that we've previously done, right? To collaboratively dive into the text and participate in a variety of instructional techniques to engage students in the process of actively reading The Hate U Give or a similar text. These should be applicable whether you're meeting your students in person, in a blended learning environment, or even in a fully virtual classroom. And so that's kind of where we're going with this today.
So with that in mind, we're meeting today after having read the text featured here, or perhaps you watched the film, or perhaps you're just joining us with the intent of reading the book at a later date. All of that is really good. We've planned for all of those experiences today. This is a book that's written by a former teen rapper turned New York Times bestselling writer. The Hate U Give was Angie Thomas's debut novel. It's a fictional story of a 16-year-old named Star Carter. Star attends a suburban prep school far from her home neighborhood. The idea is that she'll have more opportunity at a different school. However, when she's the only witness to the fatal shooting of her unarmed best friend, a Black boy, at the hands of a police officer, it makes national headlines. This story was inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and was made into a popular and critically acclaimed film, which you might have seen. It's a story about a girl's search for justice, and it's incredibly powerful.
So we're going to start off, since we're all coming from different places in this process, by free writing in a tool called Padlet. If you are already familiar with Padlet, we're going to drop the link into the chat, and you can go ahead and dive in and go ahead and respond to the question that you're going to see there. If you're not as familiar, Padlet is a digital pin or community board. Think of it as a space where advertisements get posted at the laundromat or the coffee shop. In a Padlet, a teacher can create a wall where students in a class interact with one another. Teachers can provide prompts, and then students can respond using text, images, links, videos, or documents. A Padlet can be public, private, or secretly shared within a small group, and you can also set up interaction tools. For example, on this Padlet, I've added a method for you to interact with your peers through comments and likes. So go ahead and take 2 minutes to respond on the Padlet linked in the chat in words, pictures, or resources. And the question is on the screen as well. How does this book or movie make you feel? If you didn't read it, what about this book or movie seems interesting to you? We'll take about 2 minutes right now to do that together. We're at about 2 minutes, and so I want to take some time to allow you all to read through what your colleagues have shared. If you want to continue typing, you're more than welcome to do so. But if you would like to take a pause to read other comments, to respond to them, or to like them, you are welcome to do so. And we'll take about 30 seconds to do that. And then we'll come back, and if you have any noticings, just keep them in the back of your mind, because this is a great opportunity for us to discuss this question. I love reading some of your comments and your thoughts here. Is there anybody who would like to share a noticing with the group or some feelings about something that they read that brought up some wonderings or some thoughts? If so, if you want to just drop your name in the chat, we'd be more than happy to open up the floor to you. Wonderful. And I do see a lot of commentary here as well, some discussions that are relating to one another that are right here in text. So thank you very much for engaging with one another. You can continue to leave this open. You can continue to talk back and forth, because this is a really important conversation for us to have, right? The power of this book really lies in not only its presentation, but in its content as well. Wonderful.
So now we're going to,
sorry.
Thank you, Cassiopeia. So now we're going to look at a passage from the text together. We'll read through it, look at a few questions, and then we're going to send you into breakout rooms to discuss. You'll have about 7 minutes to chat, so please make sure that everyone who would like to discuss is able to have their voice heard. Cassiopeia, are we still going to do breakout rooms?
If you're comfortable, we can just have a conversation here. Would that feel good?
I think that would probably be better, yeah, because we're just a small group, so I want to make sure that we don't make the conversation too small. So we'll have about 7 minutes to chat, so please make sure that we're all going to be able to have our voice be heard. There are no requirements to speak. Just feel free to chime in as you feel comfortable, and that could include unmuting your mic, or also just dropping comments into the chat, or going back to the Padlet and adding your comments there. So we really want to make it free and open for everyone to participate to the level that they feel comfortable. If you're more of an extrovert like Cassiopeia, you'll be talking. If you're more of an introvert like me, I'll be chatting in the chat. So this is what I love about this opportunity here. So here's the passage we're analyzing. It comes from chapter 3, pages 34 and 35. And if you're all wondering why we chose this one, this is actually part of the Words of Life curriculum and one of the activities from there. So this is where we're really melding and merging all of that together. It's a lot of blending and braiding. So the passage says, I've seen it happen over and over again. A Black person just gets killed for being Black, and all hell breaks loose. I've always said that if I saw it happen to somebody, I would have the loudest voice, making sure the world knew what went down. Now I'm that person, and I am too afraid to speak. So the questions that we'll be discussing in our room together here is, why is the speaker star afraid to speak up? What risk does telling her story entail? What does this conflict say about her as a character? What would you do in her situation? And then share about a time that you were afraid to speak up. What happened? So before we begin, does anyone have any questions, concerns, any clarifications? So Peggy, you're right. The system's not allowing you to unmute yet. We'll give you an opportunity to unmute in 1 second. Thank you for reminding us. I appreciate that. All right, Cassiopeia, you ready, love? All right, so we're going to unmute. And again, sharing your answers in the chat or in out loud, please do so. I'm going to mute myself so that we give everyone a chance to have their voices heard.
And as Dr. Dardis just mentioned and Peggy mentioned as well, the reason that we have that unmute setting on, it should have been removed, but if for some reason you're not able to unmute, please do let us know. You can raise your hand or you can type it in the chat. We're happy to have you speak. We would love to give you the opportunity to have your voice heard. And we were trying to make sure that this was a safe space for everyone as we established our norms.
I can get us started. This was something that really struck me as kind of the world was kind of opening up in the book was Star's. There's a little bit of discomfort in both her school environment and in her neighborhood, and it was really when this happens, it just reminded me of like what would have been keeping her from feeling empowered or safe or ready to speak was knowing what speaking how it would come up against and crash with that discomfort in both of those worlds. Like she's riding a fence and, can't be Black at school. And is the kid going to a white school at home? And it just, she has to ride the fence, and that really complicated for me her character's ability to like harness her bravery to do what she ends up finding the bravery to do in the end.
I often equate this journey to equity as a hiking trail. And I think about it in the perspective of there are some people who they're not interested in going for a hike. They want to stay home. They want to watch Netflix, right? Like they want to live their comfortable life and do the things that they're doing. And there are a lot of people who know that going on a hike is going to be important for them. It's going to be important for their mental health, their physical health. It's going to be important for others. It's going to be important for keeping their environment safe. And they're willing to engage in that process. But that when they go on the hike, they're going to be at a different pace as other people, right? So there's some who are in the parking lot and they didn't really come for a real hike. They showed up with their flip-flops on and they're just planning on going and doing, 15 minutes, and they're going to come back and that's going to be it on their hike for the day. And there's other people who have come and they have their hiking boots on and they are ready to go for the entire day. They have a day pack. And when we think about this hike, there are some people who are taking their time in the parking lot. They're still lacing things up. They're interested in the journey and they want to begin to process this, but they're not ready to take a quick pace and go and disappear for 8 hours or maybe even to do an overnight. And there are others that are at mile 2 already. And those who are at mile 2 have to make a decision in this path of equity. They have to make a decision whether they want to go back to the parking lot to try to support and try to pick up their colleagues, or whether at this point in time, it is more important for them to continue pushing forward. And I think that to relate that to this text, I think that we're all in a space where we have to decide where our priorities are. And our priorities are going to be different for every person. And it's okay for our priorities to be different for every person because we're all different people. But I think Star really wrangles with a very similar situation. She has to contend with her own, her own personal character, her character traits, the things that she is, the things that she associates with, and she has to decide, is this something that I am going to engage in if I'm going on this hike, where am I on this hike? And what direction am I going to take on this hike? And is this going to be a hike where I'm here to support someone else in taking the path a little bit slower? Or is this a hike where I have to protect myself and acknowledge the fact that I'm about to be gone for the next 8 hours and I need to take the pace that I need to take? So I do think that that there is some element of that, right? Like not specifically to say that Star is on an equity journey here, but Star is on a personal discovery journey to identify what her voice is going to say, and whether speaking up is going to put her and her family at personal risk as well. We have some really great comments in the chat. Candace, would you mind reading yours? Or
sure. I apologize. I have a little bit of an unstable connection. So if you can hear me, I'll go ahead and read that. I do think that children of color as a whole have to try significantly harder to assimilate at predominantly white institutions. We are told to keep our voices small as to not be seen as the angry Black person stereotype, because we are conditioned that should we step out of line, we can quite literally lose our lives.
I really love that comment. And I think that it relates very closely also to the feelings that Star had when she was contending with Khalil's behavior in the car, right? Like she had this experience of having a conversation at home that was a protective behavior. And she was experiencing that someone else didn't have those same rules, and it made her very fearful, and obviously it was, you know, with good reason as well. So I think that really kind of relates to what you're saying, Candace, about that last line. We are conditioned that should we step out of line, we can quite literally lose our lives. She saw that happen. She saw that actually happen. And she's a child. She's a girl. So thank you so much.
I think what I really related with Star in that she never felt like she really fit in either situation at school or at home. And for me, being the daughter of a Mexican migrant mother and going to a Catholic school, you know, I was the little girl in the early 80s that brought bean burritos and quesadillas to school for my lunch. And yet everyone around me was eating bologna and Lay's potato chips. And I always just felt really, really different and odd, and never that I was quite there in either kind of place. I always had a foot in either side and never felt like I ever was stable. And actually it wasn't until I actually talked with Cassiopeia, and we talked about being white presenting people of color. And I was like, wow, that really helped to help me to think about and define who I was in that way. So thank you.
Yes, I relate to that very much. I mean, when I was little, I didn't have, I went to school and there were a lot of primarily white school, and I never had people over. And I remember one time in high school, I had someone over and she said, wow, your house is so Mexican. Because my mother had, candles, and we had a lot of the Synopsis, and just our decor was like that. And I was mortified, so having the one foot in both places, I totally related to that. And so what does this conflict say about Star's character? Also that she cares, she has one foot on each side, and she actually cares about all of these people. She's so empathetic, and she's such a wonderful character and so thoughtful. But it's a big burden that she carries, and she doesn't have a choice, for this equity journey that she's on. She doesn't have a choice. She's just on it.
I think you hit that last statement for sure.
Yeah, and Abby, I was really, thinking about her equity journey and thinking about myself at that age. Would I have had the wherewithal to even have that ability to speak up? I mean, it's not until I was in my 40s that I even felt like I could even speak to the injustices that I was seeing happening with emerging multilinguals because of that. So, having the ability to speak up, I don't know if I would be able to do that at her age.
I agree. You're in survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think there's also, the reality, and you kind of alluded to this, Leah, but the reality that people who are white presenting are also on a different journey, right? Like we have the privilege to not have to speak up as well, because there is nothing that is assumed about you based on the way that you look. So I think that that's a secondary portion of it as well. And I'm not speaking specifically about your experience, but rather of mine as someone who identifies as Taiwanese American. You know, in my family, we had a very, very strong tie to our culture at home, but it all lived within our home. It didn't expand outside of our home. We were essentially encouraged to be as American as possible outside of our home because it was a protective measure, right? When my grandmother came here from Taiwan, she was discriminated against and really treated very badly. And so as a result, it was always safer for us to be as white as possible when we were outside of our house. And so I think that you know, this is a great instance of the fact that Star is already, you know, a fish out of water. She is already an individual who is outside of her element in the school that she goes to. She already has something that she has to carry, that burden of not having the privilege of being able to fit in with other people. And so it's not just a matter of she can decide whether or not to speak up or she can decide whether or not to engage. It is a matter of everyone is looking to her to be the voice. And that is a completely different ball of wax right there, right? Like that is a situation where, and I know that many of our colleagues of color have had this experience as well, where, you know, everyone is looking to you. Everyone is looking to you all the time. Black Lives Matter protests start to ramp up, and immediately your DM box is filled with questions of people wanting you to validate their experiences and their thoughts and their feelings. And it's requiring a lot of education to be put on the backs of our you know, brothers and sisters of color and of marginalized communities. And I think that the conflict makes it much bigger than what, you know, than even just the fact that Star has had this traumatic experience that she has had to deal with. It is much bigger than that because she is the face of that traumatic experience as well. She doesn't get to navigate it and to experience her feelings and to decide if she wants to go into protective mode and to decide if she wants to, you know, not have anything to do with it. She doesn't have that luxury. She is the story. And I think that is adds an extra layer of challenge.
But we're really fortunate. We have the two sisters in Poway that started their Instagram about Black in Poway, and really understanding how to address racism. So we do have young people that are out there fighting the fight to really show their experiences. And what was powerful about them, and that I listened to them speak in January, was that it wasn't just other students that were coming to them. It was adults, it was teachers, it was parents. So that we do have students that do have that capacity and the efficacy and the agency to really speak up in that way. And we really need to continue to cultivate that with all of our young people, and not just have those that are living it, but also have the bystanders speaking up. And that's hard too, to address the other people that are around that. So
I do want to also amplify the comment in the chat as well, just so that we can all hear it. It says, in keeping with the hike analogy, people of all groups set up roadblocks to hiking together. So there's fear to try to help because it's seen by some as fake and by others as judgmental. In Star's case, how could she know that taking the risk would have accomplished anything while risking all that she had achieved? It's a really interesting, I think, perspective on that hike analogy and that setting up roadblocks. And I think that there's a lot of feelings that go into it. And I think at the end of the day, we all need to understand that everyone is an individual person on their own journey who is contending with their own experiences and their own backgrounds and things like that. And also that some of our journeys are much more challenging than other journeys. Some of us have had to face many more roadblocks, right? Some of us have had much more privilege than others. And so I think that that absolutely there are things that happen on the hike. There are 100% things that happen on the hike. And also you shouldn't have to witness your friend being murdered while you're, in a car driving home. No matter what age you are, you shouldn't have to witness something like that, and then to contend with being the survivor and the witness of that. So I know that we could talk about this conversation all day long, but to honor our time, I would just want to briefly highlight our next activity. We're actually not going to engage in this activity fully. And Candace, I'd love if you bring your reflection back as well, because we will have an opportunity for reflection later. And I think that it's so key to this conversation. But I also want to make sure that we're able to get through all of these things. So our next plan was to engage in an activity where we brainstorm about some questions that relate to the text. And I think that this actually would have been a really logical movement forward in our conversation, because we were sort of talking about the differences of the path that we walk based on who we are. Now, we would typically, or the plan was for us to use a tool called Jamboard to do this. And if you're not already familiar with Jamboard, it is a virtual whiteboard. It is a tool that allows you to work collaboratively with a group of people at the same time. And it's a really great one for classrooms because it's part of Google Suite. It's easy to share. Everyone is pretty familiar with how to change permissions. And to engage with it. So while we're not going to move to Jamboard right now to engage in this conversation, I will go ahead and I will open that up for you. Perhaps I will, we'll see. There you are. So what we would do is we would utilize this bar on the left-hand side, and all of these buttons do something different. So there's a sticky feature, there's a photo feature, there's a text feature. And so if you would like to add any thoughts to these ideas, please feel welcome to, but understand that we're going to skip this activity today for the intent of preserving time for questions and further reflection. But you can look at these questions at the top and please think about them as we're moving into our next section where we're looking at the curriculum, because these are questions, again, that came from our Words Alive curriculum, and they're incredibly powerful. Now, at the top of the screen, you'll notice that there's a little icon that looks like this. This will allow you to toggle back and forth between the different pages, and there are 3 pages. So those questions, again, that were prepared by Words Alive were: how does language contribute to the way individuals are perceived by others in society? How does Khalil's language affect the police officer's perception of him? And do you think the situation would have ended differently had Khalil used different language? This question is really interesting to me because I think it provides a lot of opportunity to dig into implicit bias, because I think that this question is turning the blame back on somebody who is in this particular instance. And so that makes it a very, very powerful springboard for having a conversation of what makes you feel that way. Do you think that it's okay to judge somebody by the way that they speak, and to really kind of dive in gently, of course, initially, and then getting into a deeper conversation, but dive into the power of language? And then finally, how would you describe Star's way of speaking, formal or informal? How does her voice shape the reader's perception of her character? And again, these questions are all designed to be in alignment with standards-driven conversations. And so that's what's really cool, right? Is we're able to really take the content standards that we're assessing mastery in classrooms of, and to use them to springboard really powerful social justice questions. So some of the conversations that you might be able to use as a follow-up to an activity like this might be talking about language registers, talking about code switching, talking about African-American vernacular English. And so this is really, it's an opportunity to take a surface level conversation about tone and to really bring it home for our students by giving them the opportunity to dive into social justice wonderings and to begin to challenge their own implicit biases and to push forward on, with getting those tennis shoes laced up, or continuing to move on past that next mile marker on their equity pathway. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to pass the baton back over to Leah to talk a little bit about the facilitation strategies we've used today.
So while it's really important that we look at the curriculum, that we understand the social justice part of this, we also want to make sure that we are looking at ourselves as facilitators of this knowledge. So we've been really intentional about what we have done here, and to really bring this and to spotlight it so that you understand why we made these instructional moves that we did. So at the very beginning, we engaged in prior knowledge about the social context, which is about connecting current learning to learning you've already experienced in your background. This is important as you work with emerging multilinguals, students with disabilities. This is a part of the universal design of learning, so that when we are connecting learning, it's not just isolated, it's within a larger context. And this is critical and important work. Another way to do this to support our emerging multilinguals with sheltered instruction would be to highlight some of the key vocabulary as well. We then began with an anticipatory set with our introduction. We wanted to do this not only about to really be inclusive for the students that were present or not familiar, but just also to really kind of have that way to spark their interest. We did our free writing, which was done on a Padlet. So for those students requiring support, I would have put into sentence frames. I would have used sentence stems. I could have used text to speech. We used pictures, we used memes. We had all of these different opportunities for students so that they can really access the information and show their learning without always being text dependent. And so we really wanted to have that opportunity for students to do that. During our discussion, we made adjustments. We talked about for those students who are more extroverted and would love to unmute and be a part of that. But we also really created opportunities within chat to put those ideas there so that we can really be flexible in our thinking. So if you were looking at, like, for example, Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching, it's really about adjusting and pivoting on a dime and being responsive to what our students are doing. And that's what you saw us doing. So while we had all these great intentions of all these activities, we also were reading the room, reading our time, and adjusting and being flexible in that so that we could be able to get to the content that was important. We did our brainstorm, and we could have done it within that the Jamboard. We would have done a brainstorm. We would have categorized it. We could have labeled it. There's a lot of opportunities there. It's really critical when we think about language registers that we talk to students about how to present themselves. I, as a principal of an elementary school, would talk to students oftentimes because we had a lot of experience with students in using the N-word and talking about what would be appropriate to school language, what's appropriate to home language, what's appropriate to friend language, and helping them to understand that in order to be socially accepted at school, you needed to use a certain language register. And so these are really critical skills that we teach. Just last night, we had a number of students in the hospitality being hired down in part of our workability and our CTE program. And so for them to understand how to access that part, we need to teach them the correct language that's going to be socially accepted in that particular context. And so again, coming back to looking at those language registers is really important. And then thinking about how we connect with our students that are still developing English, really, really critical. So the next question we would have opened up to all of you would be, what other facilitation techniques that we haven't drawn attention to or that we might use to engage students in this conversation? So one would be, I think, the intentionality of voice. So who does the talking, does the learning, and providing a variety of instructional practices to vary the experience for students with different learning needs and styles. And so while we're using this in a virtual context, there are opportunities to use this within the in-class context by having students log in on their phone or on their device and being able to access those ways of having that. It also allows for students who don't know quite what to say yet, gives them an opportunity to read other students' ideas and be able to then say, okay, this is the kind of like the information that I need to be sharing here. So is there any other ones that we didn't talk about, Cassiopeia, that we think we need to bring attention to?
I think we tackled a bunch of different instructional strategies today. And of course, there are so many possible instructional strategies that you can dive into with this, both tech-based and non-tech-based. And we wanted to, because of my experience working in educational technology in particular, we wanted to highlight some of those tools that you can use to have robust conversations in the classroom. But we will share our contact information later as well. And so if you have any follow-up questions about any of these different tools that we have used or any of the different methods of presenting this information, we would be more than happy to assist with that as well.
And I also would recommend that you don't shy away from these conversations, even with students who have really moderate to severe disabilities. It's one of the things that we're talking a lot about within my department is how do we support our students with very moderate to severe disabilities that use other ways of augmented communication and looking at their voice output devices to have these kinds of conversations. We just recently in the news, we have an adult transition program down in San Diego that is talking about social justice and how to understand discrimination, because, you know, while outwardly, if you're African American, people already associate you with you. Well, if you have Down syndrome, people already have discrimination against you. So we really need to think about ways that we provide that opportunity for all students to have these kinds of conversations.
Thank you so much, Leah. So we wanted to share with you some of the things that we really love about the curriculum provided on the Hate U Give by Words Alive. And so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to drop this curriculum link right now into the chat for you so that you can access it if you would be interested. I apologize, it actually didn't go through as a link, but you can copy and paste that into your browser. And you can see the curriculum is here in the image, but these are some of the things we loved about it. We love that there's a timeline activity. We love the identity map. Facilitation norms were built in. There are text-based questions, that it's aligned with the standards, that it has a theme overview as you proceed through the book, and that it has supplemental texts. And I just want to very, very quickly say that the supplemental text is one of the things that just really resonated with me as we were going through this curriculum. And I loved that as we were looking through each of the different sections, it would offer some additional texts that relate to those topics. So other things that you might be able to use for incorporating a variety of different conversations into your classroom. That was really powerful. Some conversations, like these are some follow-up supplemental texts on the Washington Post Pulitzer Prize project on police shootings, for example. So it really calls out a number of resources that you can use to continue the conversation in your classroom and to expand on student skills. We really love that. So on that note, I would love to introduce once again Amanda Bonds. And Amanda, if you would like to highlight anything with regards to the curriculum, the time is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. The most important thing to know is every educator is an explorer first, in our view, and we're all exploring what works, what resonates, what's interesting to us, what's interesting to learners in the room that we're sharing the space with. So know that this isn't a prescriptive tool. It's a tool to get started. If you've ever seen the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, they say like the pirate code, it's more like guidelines. Like think of it that way. This is something to pull what resonates with the young people in the room. So reading the room, I think, is something we gain comfort with. The more and more we are helping shepherd those learning experiences. So pull what works for you. You don't have to use everything. You might find that one group of students really likes conversation. So let that fill the space. There may be other students who really prefer writing. Go that way. So know that there's way more here than is reasonable to cram into a certain class size on purpose, so that we can cull what works with the young people we're sharing that time with. And in a broader sense, at Words Alive, our mission is to connect people to the power of reading, because we know, or we believe, especially in 2021, like our year, this day on Earth, you cannot truly be free without the ability to read. It is a foundational skill set to provide for yourself and your family, and to exercise your agency to the broadest extent. But it also deepens our humanity. And what I love about using juicy, like really good, fresh, relevant stories with young people is that connecting through stories is human nature. And we can not necessarily a proxy, but it is a very, to connect through someone else's story by what's on the page or what's in the movie. Just like in this conversation here, it opened up for people to reflect on their own experiences and to hear about the experiences of others and find things that they have in common. So the story may have sent you on your own roller coaster of emotions when you read it, but it's doing that in groups too. And that is where we think such a rich opportunity comes from going deep in the stories we read together to see what we learn from them.
So wonderful. Thank you so much. And I did want to make sure that we do have time for questions, reflections, additions. And Candace, if you want to elaborate on your comment about the young lady being eviscerated for not being an ideal witness, I think that it really resonated with me, that particular comment that you added to the chat, because I think that is the risk that Star had, right? Like she had to she had to decide, is it more important for me to be a voice for this thing that happened, or is it more important for me to be able to live the life that I want to live and to protect my family? And that's a horrifying choice to have to contend with as a young lady, as a young adult, right? So, so if you do have any specific wonderings or thoughts about any of the topics for today or the curriculum itself, please feel free to add them to the chat or to unmute now if you have something that you'd like to add. And what's really interesting, and as we're waiting on, I know there's a couple people who are adding some thoughts in perhaps, but as we're waiting on that to happen, one of the conversations that arose while Dr. Dardis and I were originally having a conversation about today's session was the discussion about language. And so it's very, very interesting that, that we talked further about the idea of registers and code switching as well. And so one of the questions we talked about was, how do you handle language that appears in this text, whether it's profanity or whether it is racially charged language that is appearing? How do you handle that? And so if you have any thoughts or feelings about that, anybody in the room would like to chime in on that. I know that my method of handling it is a method that works with my community and my classroom, and we all have to find our own pathways. And so I think that would be a really powerful conversation. And if you want to send a tweet to me on Twitter, I'll put my handle at the end. I would love to have a conversation with you about that as well, if you don't want to have it here, because I just really think that is a tremendous conversation that we need to engage in, right? Like, how do we make a safe space for students where they can be authentically themselves and also provide the skills that they need so that they can find success without having the challenges that they face really stand as those roadblocks to them. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that this curriculum is helpful.
Cassiopeia, if I may.
Yes, please.
Just really quickly, so I just want to let everyone know about this show on Netflix. It's called Big Mouth. It is about like middle school kids going through changes and things, but there is a song about code switching that is literally one of the greatest songs I have ever seen to explain it, done by the young Black man whose name escapes me from the show. And if you need a good understanding of it, I would say watch the song. It's on YouTube. It's literally called, thank you, Code Switching from Big Mouth. And it was such a great way, I think, mainstream wise, to help people understand what that is for a Black woman or a Black man, especially at that age where it's like, it's not about being fake and phony. It's really about assimilating to the group you're with. So I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you so much. I'm pulling the link right now and I will make sure that we have it in the chat. I do see an additional comment about, I would unmute, but it's very loud. I thought it was interesting, in the film, Star is fair-skinned, and the film truly highlights the two different worlds Star inhabits. And I think that you are so right, Demilo, and I think that is an additional element that we haven't spoken about yet, right? Is this idea of colorism as well. And so thank you so much for bringing up that comment, because I think that it's very true. And we kind of alluded a little bit to the idea that your identity is your identity, and it is not necessarily determinant on the way that you look, but also for many people of color, we have to acknowledge that your identity is determinant on the way that you look as well. Right. And so I think that it's really for those of us in the room and for those of us as educators to be as engaged in this process, to be going on this hike as much as they possibly can, because this is the work that is going to help make our classrooms into safe spaces for our students. Right. These conversations that we're having is really, really important. And thank you so much, Peggy, for that comment as well. Education does happen everywhere. Completely agree with that. So thank you. Now, I know we're a little bit over time, so very, very quickly, I just want to mention a couple of quick things. If you would like to read more books that are centered around topics like this one, you can visit our bookshop by going to BIPOCSupportFoundation.org and clicking on Bookshop at the top. Here's that link for you. We have curated and are continuing to curate lists of fiction and nonfiction texts for pre-readers, tweens, teens, and adults, as well as everyone who identifies as in between, right? Our bookshop is for everyone. So those of you who are in the field of education, but also those of you who are in the community at large. And on our website, you can also subscribe to our newsletter, donate to our nonprofit to help us keep up the work that we're doing, and access all of our offerings under the resource tab. We would encourage you to do that. Even if you're a business owner, we have business focused offerings. We have partnerships with organizations that can do training. So we would love to participate in this work with you and to engage with you on an ongoing basis. If you'd like to volunteer, there's a space where you can sign up for that as well. Finally, Dr. Dardis has added a link to the chat that is a survey we would love for you to fill out if you can. It's located again at bit.ly/BSF22021. And that's going to help give us some feedback about today's event, as well as to Words Alive about the curriculum resources that they've provided. And also allow you to be included in our messaging for the next book club, which is going to be centered around pedagogy as we dive into this text, Joe Feldman's Grading for Equity. It's a great discussion about what teachers can do in their classroom to create more equitable learning environments. So you can also find all of these resources, including the book we read and discussed today, linked there. And then finally, I just wanted to thank all of our speakers and participants and our sponsor, Words Alive, for being here today. And give an extra special thanks to the entire team behind the BIPOC Support Foundation. Your support in finding a way for this work to continue is so deeply appreciated. And if you feel so moved, here are some handles where you can follow our team on social media, send follow-up questions, engage in conversations. We are here for it. Thank you so much again for being here today. We are looking forward to seeing you at our next book club on Sunday, June 21st at 2 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.